On May 2nd, 2008, Marvel Studios produced and Paramount Pictures released Iron Man. Based on a mid-tier comic book superhero who nobody really knew about, the movie took off like a rocket ship. It made tons of money, reignited Robert Downey Jr.'s career in shocking fashion, and turned weapons manufacturer turned superhero Tony Stark into a household name. It had heart, humor, action, and a spirit of adventure. It was also loaded to the brim with Easter eggs, references to other Marvel characters, and a surprising amount of foreshadowing. Over a decade later, we were blessed with Avengers Endgame, a love letter encompassing the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe that concluded with the heroic death of Tony Stark himself and the saving of the universe. In between those two films were a handful of crappy ones and many more that were loads of fun. A handful of their movies were delayed out of both 2020 and 2021, and Marvel used 3 streaming series to fill in some of the spaces and give us a glimpse into what would come next. Enter Loki, an extended look at what exactly happened to the Green Menace after he snatched up the Tesseract in the 2012 timeline that was created as a direct consequence of the Avengers time heist. So, how is it? Thank you so much for checking out the review. Before we get started, click on that red subscribe button and the notification bell. That way you know whenever I post a new piece of content. After Loki absconds with one of the Infinity Stones, he finds himself on the outs with the Time Variance Authority, a sketchy government-ish agency whose existence conjures up far more questions than it answers. Our initial introduction to the TVA and the worker assigned to Loki's case make up some of the very best world building that Marvel has ever done. The chemistry between Tom Hiddleston's Loki and Owen Wilson's Mobius is so good, in fact, it largely overshadows all of the other character work the show does. Wilson was an inspired casting choice by the show's creators, and easily the best new character of the 3 series that Marvel has released so far. The TVA has a singular purpose: to protect the flow of time. To constantly keep their eye on the ball requires the tracking, hunting, and catching of time variants. A variant is an alternate timeline version of a character. Probably the best example of this is actually present in Endgame. That would be when Steve Rogers, aka Captain America, goes back in time to collect several Infinity Stones and comes across a version of himself. Because Endgame Steve chooses to mess with the timeline, that actually makes him the variant, not the other way around. All this time meddling naturally causes bad things to happen, with timelines being created and branching off just like the Ancient One predicted it would in Endgame. This creates more variants and more variants and more variants. That's the big picture world that surrounds Loki's more intimate character story. The God of Mischief is roped into a TVA mission to locate a wicked variant of himself, and this story is mostly successful. While Mobius and Loki work together, their relationship is hilarious and genuine, largely due to the fact that Mobius is aware of every single time Loki has stabbed someone in the back, and still allows Loki the opportunity to stab him in the back. The story runs headlong into conspiracy theories, time jumps, and all other manner of weird and wondrous things. The strange elements of Loki's story are what makes the show so very unique. Instead of a bad guy turned good, he's basically a weird evil guy who's thrown into a world that's somehow even more weird than he is. Loki interacting with his own variants allows the character to learn more about who he is, and more importantly, who he wants to be. By starting off the show after the ending of Avengers in 2012, we get the exact same Loki who is hell-bent on world domination. This turns out to be a fantastic story decision, because Mobius forces Loki to reckon with the absolute monster he is at this point in his life. This is way before Ragnarok, Infinity War, and Endgame, and it allows Hiddleston to give a remarkably deep and emotionally wrenching performance. It reminds me of the very first Thor film, when Loki learns of his true heritage as an adopted frost giant. If you haven't seen the first Thor in a while, you're missing out. Because while Thor's passage through the hero's journey is rather predictable, the performance that Hiddleston gives in his first go-around as Loki is emotionally devastating. There's similar moments here where Loki has a glimpse into his future, specifically a decision he makes during Thor: The Dark World that will haunt him until his dying breath. Much more low-key but equally solid is Owen Wilson as Mobius. I never really pictured Owen Wilson being in the MCU, but he doesn't just fit in, he excels as a regular Joe office type who spent the majority of his life as a pencil pusher. While he has a mysterious past, the well-meaning Mobius wants to be the guy to always do the right thing. If that means he has to trust a conniving trickster god who should never be trusted, okay. Mobius is like that guy you see in spy movies that works in the CIA office but never actually does anything cool. He's not the guy who gets to jet set off to Hong Kong and base jump off a building to assassinate a rebel leader. He's the guy who that guy calls to pick up his dry cleaning because he's too damn busy saving a country. In an effort to not spoil the show, there's one final character that I have to briefly talk about. The mischievous variant that's doing shadowy things and tearing at the fabric of time wasn't at all what I was expecting, but they play an integral part in both Loki's development as a character and the future of the entire MCU. The back half of the show focuses on Loki's relationship with this very specific person. I won't spoil it, but suffice it to say, there's a lot here to like. If there's one thing that Loki does better than WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier, it's to push the MCU forward and establish footholds with both familiar and new characters. The ending of this show introduces some world-shaking ideas and what might very well be the next big Marvel baddie. Only time will tell if this character ends up being the Dark Elf Malekith or Thanos 2.0, but let's leave that up to the future to decide. As a whole, Loki is a weird, trippy, honest, dark, and emotionally gripping story that starts off incredibly strong, drags and plods a little bit in the middle, and finishes just well enough to justify the ride it's provided for the audience. Much like Iron Man, it shows us the incredible potential behind whatever Marvel has cooking up for us behind the scenes. While it's not the best thing they've ever done, it's certainly the best show they've made so far, and has carved a nice little space for itself in the MCU that will ensure the Green God of Mischief is here for a long time to come. Thank you so much for checking out the review. If you enjoyed it or found it helpful, please consider subscribing. You can also like and share the video since that tells YouTube it's worth promoting. Sound off down in the comments, let me know what you think of Loki, and I'll see you next Wednesday at 9 a.m.